Can you survive Five Nights at Freddy's? And no, I don't mean can you survive the night shift. I mean, can you survive the experience of watching this movie? Because it was pretty awful. Alright, before we get started, as always, a quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you enjoy the content I make and would like to offer your support, then for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name listed right here at the start of every video. Link to that is in the description below. And now, let's get into the actual review.
Bobby, go!
5 Nights at Freddy's is an adaptation of the video game series and tells the story of Mike, a down-on-his-luck security guard who has custody of his little sister following his parents' death, who takes a job doing security work at an abandoned entertainment center where the 4 animatronic mascots come to life at night and are out for blood. Now, full disclosure, I have never played Five Nights at Freddy's. I have never interacted with this franchise whatsoever in any form. So I'm approaching this film as a blind neophyte. However, I've long said that any film, whenever it is adapting something else, needs to be able to stand on its own. So if there is a reason why the film is the way it is, that has something to do with the game, that might very well be, but that doesn't make this a good film. This film's screenplay is so jumbled and uneven as it tries and fails to juggle so many plots and stories and characters, and oftentimes just haphazardly tries to tie it all together into something digestible. This film spends a lot of time on this main character's struggles with his past of his brother being kidnapped, and he has dreams where he's reliving the experience over and over again and trying to figure out who the kidnapper is, and yet it's also somehow tied to these ghosts that also control these animatronics. I honestly can't explain it any better than that. This film feels like hot potato screenwriting. Someone would write a page, then someone would write another page, regardless of what was written prior, and on and on and on. And then one final writer came in and desperately tried to tie all of these dissonant elements together and failed miserably. These elements clash together with no sense of finesse, that it leaves you genuinely bewildered at some of these baffling decisions. There is a subplot involving a greedy aunt trying to take custody of Abby away from Mike, and how she hires some thugs to break into Freddy's and smash up the place. That really ultimately goes nowhere, has a very weak payoff, and actually creates some narrative gaps. And I know why the scene was included, because the film needed a higher body count, but still, from a narrative perspective, this movie would be better if these scenes and all of this unnecessary drama was cut from the film. And I had heard before that there was initially a 3-hour cut of this movie, and honestly, it does feel like that this was absolutely torn to shreds in the editing room. Things happen that are never explained or don't make sense, like the opening kill scene never comes back into play at all in any way, shape, or form, and the climax literally feels like they're just throwing every single plot point at the wall and trying to get something to stick. And the villain's motivation honestly doesn't make any sense. I'm not even sure if they explained it, at all. But let's get down to what's probably the biggest sin for any movie that's supposed to be a horror film. This movie's not scary. At all. I've seen scarier stuff inside my refrigerator, and this shouldn't be difficult. This is a premise that seems tailor-made for horror. Creepy animatronics come to life at night and try to kill you. But the director, Emma Tammy, just completely fails at trying to capture any kind of creepy atmosphere. There's no sense of claustrophobia, no sense of creatures lurking around every corner, and no real sense of danger throughout most of the film. The movie seems like it was trying to just ride the tailcoats of being deemed scary, based solely on its intellectual property, and through the use of cheap jump scares. But even the jump scares in this film are lame. Even in the crappiest horror films I've ever seen, the jump scares in the film, even if I knew they were coming, would at least make me jolt in my seat. This movie couldn't even accomplish that bare minimum standard. And it also doesn't help that this film is severely limited by its PG-13 rating, so it can't really show anything. Now, there are ways around this. You can still make a PG-13 horror film work. I've seen good ones, like The Quiet Place, Mama, Lights Out, The Ring, the Insidious movies, and others. But the one thing those movies had that this one doesn't is a creepy, foreboding atmosphere. There is no such atmosphere in this film, or at least they tried to, but it just doesn't work. And when I say this is a PG-13 horror film, I feel like that's underselling it, because this is one seriously tame horror film, almost like this was made specifically for little kids. I've heard some people say that this could be seen as like a good gateway horror film for tweens, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I've gotten so desensitized from watching so many horror films, but I'm not sure how anybody except from young kids could find this scary. But honestly, even that feels like an insult to some truly great horror-themed movies aimed at kids, like Nightmare Before Christmas or Paranorman. I think in order for this film to actually work, this needed to be a master at juggling tone. It needed to know when something could be played seriously, when something could be played up for dark comedy, and when it was appropriate to do a jump scare, and how to properly utilize said jump scares. You know, kind of like Megan did earlier this year. And the entire thing is wrapped in this really predictable story, where you can predict exactly what's going to happen. Like, yeah, guess who the big bad guy is while you're watching the film. If you're even slightly aware of horror tropes, or if you noticed who they hired to play what's essentially a bit part, you'll be able to figure out who the mastermind is behind the entire thing. If there are no surprises, then there's nothing to engage the audience with, and the whole thing just becomes a boring slog. And there's not even a lot of really bad funny moments to laugh at either. The most I can think of is there's a scene where Mike is attacking a guy in broad daylight, for some reason thinking that the guy's a kidnapper even though he's obviously not, and somehow not only doesn't get arrested, but somehow doesn't have his sister taken out of his custody. But aside from that, this was mostly just a chore to get through. As for positives, there honestly aren't many, but I will give the filmmakers credit for using real animatronics from Jim Henson's Creature Shop for the animatronics rather than just CGing the whole thing. They actually look really convincing and it was well done, and they managed to do it with a budget under $20 million. So yeah, Hollywood, take note, this is what you're going to want to do going forward. But honestly, aside from that, there's not much here. Five Nights at Freddy's is a film lost within itself. The screenplay seems unsure what exactly it wants to do, and therefore commits to absolutely nothing. This isn't going to be scary to anybody except for people that maybe have never seen a horror film before. And the plot is so idiotic. It really says something that the ripoff of Willy's Wonderland starring Nicolas Cage did a much better job at capturing what I feel a Five Nights at Freddy's movie should be. My recommendation, I'd watch that one instead. It's flawed, but it is a much better and more interesting and more entertaining film than this. As for this film, Five Nights at Freddy's earns an easy empty shot. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film I watch or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link to that is in the description below. And make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming reviews. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.